I think we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to present Jade Ashford here. So she's got a talk on, I'll let you say it better than me, but GRC can kind of have a rap for being a bit boring, maybe. But she's going to show that that is not the case. So I will let her take it away. Jade Ashford.
All right, so as I'm going to get started, I know it's getting later in the day, and I don't judge if you decide you want to leave and go home. It is recorded. But when we're going to get started, we're going to talk about CMMC today. You'll notice that if you have looked into CMMC at all, CMMC is daunting, and it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of paperwork, and it's government. And government is terrifying because if you mess up, you're in a lot of trouble. Example, CMMC is kind of becoming the big buzzword in the government right now. If you work in defense, industrial base, that's kind of where, if you do anything for the government, you fall in that category. And if you work in there, you're getting contracts from them. And if you're getting contracts from them, there are certain types of information that you have to know how to hold and how to hold it correctly. If you're not holding it correctly, you lose it. And some of these contracts are like $40 million, you know? And some of these companies, if say we were all ourselves, each representing one company, each of us might be getting millions of dollars in them, and it may not be our only source of income, but for some of these companies it is. Or at least it's a major source of their income. And to find out that you need to be CMMC compliant can be a little scary when you actually start looking at the list. There is 320 practices, 14 domains, 320 practices. That's a lot to do. I don't know about you. I don't really feel like going through all 300. Well, let's say I don't want to go through all of that either. I'm on the other end. I actually just finished a bunch of work so that I can actually help give these assessments. And even on that end, I don't really want to do it either. I'm just going to get, I'm there because that's where they asked me to be at that point. But today, to make this a little bit more interesting, because I'm not a fan of being a professor who talks up front, we're going to decide, we're going to be Ocean's 11. And instead of actually going in, and we're not going to break into the Bellagio, we're going to build the vault for the Bellagio. And more specifically, we're going to do a reverse heist. We have to get this vault ready before the auditor shows up. So our target are level 1 and level 2 compliance for CMMC. Is really important as we talk, that not everybody that does CMMC needs level 2. There is a lot going around about that right now, that, everybody at some point is going to want level 2 or level 3. Level 3 is still, another year out before they really start actually implementing that fully into contracts, but that is in the works. But the large majority, truly the large majority, can get away with a self-assessment level 1. And that is only 17 controls. It's super basic. We're talking like super basic hygiene here, you guys. This is, hey, does everybody have a password? Do they, we're talking like really bare minimum, you guys. Not that hard. The only data that you can have if you decide to go that route, though, is the FCA data. So this is your contract information. This is like, hey, we agreed that we would give you this many bolts if you're going for machining. Like, we are going to give you this many bolts at this many times of the year for this much money. That's FCI data. You may not be able, if you get into the specifics about how that bolt is explicitly designed, that might fall into level 2. And level 2 is what we're going to actually focus on today. We have what we call controlled unclassified information. And so quick information thing, just to make sure everybody kind of understands what that is. That's stuff that, like, those could be the parts of a jet, for like those cool fighter jets that we all see after the national anthem, flying over the stadium. Or it could be your CTI, it can be ITAR, I'm going to throw out all sorts of alphabet soup at you, and if you don't know what that means, please come and ask me after, and I'm happy to chat with you. But for the sake and the time constraint that we have, I will kind of breeze through some of that if it's not important to the rest of the conversation. But the reason that we're focusing on this today is because this actually, everything about CMMC is cumulative. So level 1 feeds into level 2. All of your basic stuff still has to be before you can pull off level 2. With CMMC level 2, you've got your 14 domains that I mentioned before, right? You've got your auditing, you've got your accountability, you've got your identification, you've got your authentication. And on top of it all, you have to do 110 different practices. But each of these practices, these 110 practices I'm referring to, all have their own objectives below. And if you don't meet one of those objectives, that whole practice, even if it has like 7 objectives for one practice, completely gone. Not the whole domain, just the practice. But you have to have all 110 practices met to get your level 2 certification. This is not like SOC 2. This is not like ISO. You can't just be like, well, you're most of the way there, we can give it to you. No. This is binary. You either get it or you don't, right? You're either in or you're out. We're going to talk a little bit about the blueprint here. So these are your 14 domains we just discussed. So some examples I gave, and keep in mind, because this is a heist, we are not going to actually use some that most of these will probably fall in the more of like a physical security standpoint, okay? If you want to actually understand a little bit more about what you could actually be seeing, we'll talk a little bit about that at the end when we go into some scenarios. And if you have a piece of paper, you want to use your phone, we can. You'll have some fun getting to see if you can pass an audit with me. I recommend, if you decide you want to go down the road of CMMC and you want to play around with this, do not jump in and start reading all of the paperwork right away. Maybe if you're going to go that route, I commend you for it. It is not how I imagine a heist group would want to start. I could see them sitting down with a blueprint, though. I could see them sitting and be like, okay, overall picture here. What's our goal? Where's our data? Well, where is our data? And not just our data specifically. We're not going for our specific data. We're actually going for the data that the government gave us. We're talking about that CUI data, the CUI, the FCI. It does not matter how garbage your security is for your company as a whole. You could all be using admin account for all they care. They don't care. As long as your stuff that you're doing for them, where their data is being held, has the security stuff that they ask for, these 17 for level 1, 110 for level 2, as long as those are met, you can do whatever you want, right? Within reason. I'm going to skip over these a little bit so that we can actually get to the kind of the fun stuff here. We got some players. So we got our target. That's the data that we're trying to get, so we can get that money. And we've got the blueprint. That's all of the different controls we have to put into place for our vault. Now I've got the players. The players here, besides us, is the assessment team that's actually going to come in and they're going to tell you, did you pull it off? They're kind of like an enemy, but we're going to go with like a frenemy here, because realistically, when you talk to them, they are also still a business themselves. They are financially motivated to help you pass. I need you to remember that, because we're going to get into it a little bit just here in a second. That's not the case for everybody involved. Because if you think about it, the C-3POs, that's what they're called. No, not C whatever Star Wars reference. Sorry, guys. It is not a robot. These are CMMC third-party assessor organizations. These groups, there's only 106 of them as of yesterday. I checked just to make sure I had the right number. There's only 106 of them. And in the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, there are over 220,000 companies, all of which will have to have CMMC level 1, 2, or 3. Level 1 does not need these guys because they can self-assess. And that covers, I think I said 140,000, roughly. That's a good chunk of them. But that still leaves 80,000 companies that have to go through the 106 that we have right now, C3PAOs. And I think there was only 80 of these or less at the beginning of the new year. So this number is not very big. And it's getting bigger, but it takes a while for them to actually reach the level that they need in order to be able to start helping, cut down on how many people need this assessment done. So that averages out to almost 800 per organization. And that's not taking into account that, some of these C3PAOs probably have a lot more assessment teams within their organization than others, Some organizations might be one-person teams, some might be kind of like a whole business model. I've seen a couple different versions of this. And because of all of that, it's right now, if you were to go and call one of these guys up and be like, yo, I need my CMMC stuff. I've got my SSP. I've got all the documentation. I'm ready. I could do it tomorrow. They're going to tell you it's going to take minimum 6 months. They are backed up like crazy, you guys. It is really bad. And to top it all off, your deadline is November. They're dropping in CMMC requirements in contracts right now. Imagine how that must look right now for everybody who has not been taking this seriously. And to top it all off, C3POs, as we mentioned earlier, are financially, they want you to pass because you have to come and get recertified every 3 years unless something significant changes with your scoping, which is a whole nother discussion. But if you keep everything pretty much the same, you have to come back every 3 years. And they're hoping you'll come back to them because it's like 60,000 roughly for like a typical assessment for these things. This is not referring to like you're actually like building up the program or any of the like employees you'll have to bring in or nothing of that. Just to have the team, like to pay them to come in and sit down for a week or two or however long they need to is about 60 grand for a typical organization. It's not a small amount of money. And so they're going to want you to pass. And we're going to have a problem there because we have something called the False Claims Act. And these guys are going to come in. And they do not really care that you mostly met it. And there's a reason why these organizations are not very many. Because they want to be a little wishy-washy. They want to just get the money. And they don't always want to talk about the fact that, well, yeah, but they clearly have it. Yeah, but they can't show me that they had it. They actually don't realize that they're doing it correctly. If you guys don't know your systems well enough to know that you're doing something correctly, why should we trust you with this information? There are soldiers' lives on the line. That is their lines they will use because that is the reality at the end of the day. And so they're decided monetarily they're going to get everybody to go out and do it. They're like, all right, if you are willing to tell on your company and whistleblow, we'll give you up to 30% of the case judgment, like settlements. That's not a small chunk of change, you guys. This is last year just from False Claims Act. Last year. They spend clearly a lot more money than that, right? They spend a lot more money on that each year on stuff for defense. But that's a good chunk of change that they're getting back. And 30%, 25 to 30% of that are going to the whistleblowers. It's a good retirement fund. Give some good examples here showing that no one is safe. Penn State, I think it's actually Pennsylvania State. In 24, they had claimed that they had done some stuff, and they had NASA contracts, they had DoD contracts. The reality was they had not actually done all of that stuff. Lost a lot of money because it's triple damages. So whatever they can find the monetary cost of, they triple that, and that is your fine. That's not small. This is a big one that just recently happened. That's Morse Corps. They claimed when they went and did their audit that they had a score of 104, and government came in, and again, they are motivated to come and make an example of you, right? They want their data safe. And they found that his score, or their score, was negative 142. That is not the same, you guys. That's terrible. And it's normal to have a negative score. Like, negative score does not necessarily mean the worst thing in the world. Obviously, you have to get that 110 score to, like, you know, be in the business to get those contracts. But when you're going through for your first time, it is normal to have negative scores. That's just the way that the scoring guide plays out. But if you want to get a little bit more real here, you might see machining, right? We talked a little bit about that earlier. They're not safe either. They're those small little groups where they're like, yo, I just have a lot of like CNC machines out here. They're still paying good money when they get caught too. So even if your machine shop is like just making the bolts for like an 130 engine, whatever they have out there, you're still liable for all of this because there's flow down requirements. It goes all the way down. If you get any of this CUI or this FCI to some degree, you need to be able to meet it. Otherwise, you will be facing any of this. So we're going to do Operation Clean Sweep. How this is going to work, you can either pull out your phone. I know normally you're not supposed to pull out your phone. Or if you're really good at mental math, you're welcome to do that too. I don't recommend it for this case. You can have a piece of paper. I don't really care. You're also just happy to sit here and follow along. We're going to go through. I have 15 scenarios, and I don't think we'll have that much time. Maybe we will. We're going to go through. You have a total of 150,000, but we have to lock out already 60,000 of that. 60,000, again, roughly how much it's going to cost for you to get your assessment done for your organization. So of that, you've got the 90,000 left. You have to go through with me. We're not going to sit here and raise hands because, you know, then we'll have to worry about how the crowd is feeling, and maybe you're like, shoot, I must be missing something. No, this is a chance for you to just play against yourself and see, do you think you can pass? There will be two options, two choices per scenario. The first one, A, will always be more expensive, but will also have the lower risk option. Choice B will cost next to nothing comparatively, but it carries a lot of risk, and in some cases will result in an automatic failure. So pick your choices wisely, and you won't know right away because we're going to act as like any normal group would. You know, we've got 150,000 for our whole budget and duct tape and a prayer, and we're just going to hope we can make through the assessment. That's typically how most IT security organizations or departments within organizations are living right now, you know, unless you're really lucky and you work for, say, like PwC. I got to see a little bit in their inner workings, and they've got this whole thing going on. They're awesome that way. Not endorsing them. But so keep track of your money. Try not to go under because that will get you fired from your organization. And try not to fail because now you just sunk a lot of money and you still failed. But we'll also learn a lot from this, I'm hoping. And I am happy to take some questions as we go through if we're feeling like we're a little lost, because I, more than anyone, understand that this is a bit, as I said, it is alphabet soup. You've got your ITAR, you got your CMMC, I've got my CCP, which, like, what does that even mean? I don't know. So phase one, we're talking scoping. If any of you guys were here earlier, there was a talk by a guy named Gideon Rasmussen. He talks a lot about scoping. So if you want to like really dive into that, hop into his or any of the other guys earlier. I think some of them spoke on it. For the purposes of this scoping, you should keep it as small as possible. You want to have as little as you can in that environment, so you put as few resources as you have to because it's already expensive. Because you'll have to think about FIPS, you have to think about FedRAMP, you have to think about GCC High. And that's just Microsoft stuff. That's not including anything else. That's just that stuff. So, first scenario. You have only 15 of your 200 employees actually are touching the government data that's like the level 2 data. So consider the risk and the friction as you're doing this as well. We're kind of the executives. We're building our vault, and we have to keep in mind that we want our employees not to hate us, because that also can keep us thinking about insider threats too. We don't also don't want them to get grumpy at us, because then we also have to deal with the whole whistleblower issue in the process, okay? So, to make it corporate-wide, everybody, you're all now going to be required to do CMMC Level 2. Like, that's how you're going to deal with all your information from here on out. So that's what you want to do. You do you. I am not saying one or the other is the right answer. I will point out that there are organizations where that would make sense if you know that there will otherwise be a lot of like leaking out to other groups occasionally. If that is the case, then you also need to consider that you're scoping it wrong. So as you're going through this, keep that in mind. We're going to take this at face value to simplify these things, okay? But understand that in a real situation, we do understand that it's not black and white like this, okay? When it comes down to it and you do the assessment, they will treat it black and white. But on your end, you have to understand that that's not how it really typically goes. So, results. How much money do you guys still have? If you chose option A, you are now out of money. So, oh no, you have 30,000 left. We have 30,000 left, and depending on time, you still have another 14 scenarios. And also, if you guys want to take this home and show it to your people, please let me know. I am more than happy to pass these along, because I know that some of this may or may not be easy to read. And also, it's just kind of fun to look at. I was pretty proud of it. We're not going to keep track of your risk for the sake of ease today, but I want you to consider that your risk, if you have any of your information leave that enclave, and again, this is a very common, option B is a very common option that most people pick. It is still very high. If you keep having your data leave that enclave, you're going to have someone come knocking at your door. And you are all legally required to report if that data is leaking out. You can't just be like, it's just this like one time. That's great, but if it was to a certain point, like if it was major to a certain degree, and you'll know in your contracts if that's something you're involved with, you have to report that. You are legally required to report that. And government's going to come knocking, because they take this pretty seriously. Again, even the machining company was not safe. All right, option number 2, our dilemma here. We have this multi-million-dollar CNC machine, and it's running Windows 7. We are on 11. We can't really upgrade it we can't update it because there's just not a way to do so anymore. The machine doesn't work on anything newer, or the software only runs on this one specific version. We've all run into this, okay? We all understand that that's the reality that we live in. What do we do? Option A is we air gap it. Air gapping is a very loaded term. We're just going to say basically we stick it logically or physically in its own area. And we're like, this is a zone where only we treat things a very, very specific way. We do the best that we can. And there is some wiggle room with these kinds of machinery within CMMC, because government is very clearly aware that you will have to have stuff like this. They are understanding of that information. However, you still have to show that you have done your absolute best. At the end of the day, this is a maturity model. This is not just a checkbox. This is how much effort are you putting into this too? Right? So like, as you guys are hearing, this is not a small little framework that we're talking. This is serious business, and it's a lot of money at stake. B, we can ignore it, throw it into your SSP. That document is like the Bible of your whole organization when it comes to CMMC stuff. Your SSP should still have it either way, truthfully. But we're just going to put it in the SSP, and we're like, hey, we know it's there. We're going to just kind of put an exception for it. We understand it's there. We're going to do some stuff later. All right, make your choice here. If you chose option B, go ahead and just crumple up your paper and throw it out the door. You failed. That's okay. Just put that in account for like, I understand that happened. See how many more times that happens to you today. But you know what? You didn't spend any money. So, you lost your $40 million contract. But, that's okay. You have a question.
How is that different from when you do software exceptions?
Software, and it's the same. It has a lot of the same stuff. And I'm happy to chat with you afterwards because it can also depend on the type of software. It really is all going to come down to scope. So truthfully, I know that there's some software that you have to have, and usually that's like required. The government will actually lay out for you, here, this is your specific environment. Here's the specific software you have to use. And you're like, how do I secure this? You'd go the air-gapped route, basically. And then on top of that, when your auditor comes in and they're like, hey, why did you do it this way? You just kind of show them that that's what the government said. That's kind of what it comes out to. And there's a specific category within your SSP that you put that under. And so auditors are not the CUI police. They will not come in and be like, how dare you do this thing? And how dare you like mark this way? That's not their job. Their job is just to make sure that your security is in line, which is good and bad, right? What if you don't know which one's which? All right, next option we've got here. You've got Jira, Monday.com. And it's not FedRAMP moderate. You are required, if you have data that's CUI data, it has to be in a FedRAMP moderate like encryption. Cannot use anything else. Use anything, if you use encryption, period, you get some points. That's the only one where you can get even partial points. But also, you still don't pass that. You're gonna have to go back and fix it. There are some ways to work with them to get that, but in the large majority of the time, at the end of the day, you have to have it in order to pass. You cannot do anything but FedRAMP moderate, and that comes from FIPS 200. So, no. All right, hopefully you guys didn't see that. No. All right, so you can see you can pick either option. One obviously saves you a little bit more money, and you have to accept the risk. Keeping in mind, again, if you put everyone, not only is it the 15 grand, but you're going to have a lot of grumpy employees. So again, you're coming at the executive level, but imagine when you're the boots on the ground, right? This is rough. These environments are not pretty, okay? They're clunky. You can only email very, very specific people. I mean, we're talking everything is blacklisted and you have to tell them explicitly who you want to message, and then it goes through a whole process before it even gets added to that list, okay? This is not like, oh, I'm going to just, grab Slack real quick and do this. No. Slack, no. Sorry. Not allowed. All right. We're going to go into a little bit more security from an identification and authorization standpoint. So, this makes me think of like Windows Hello. So this happens a lot. I've had clients who have come up to me and they're like, hey, I'm going to have our company do this. We're going to meet the standard. I want to be an exception to that. Okay, who has access to the data? Well, I do, but it's just me. No, that's not how this works. No, executives are not allowed to be excluded. So executives does not equal exclusion. That should be a mantra, I feel like. We should just make that a t-shirt. I'll let you just like kind of think about this because I know that some companies are very like, we're going to all use Okta, and everyone else is like, you just have to use MFA of some sort. I want you to take a second, think about this. Which one do you think would make the most sense for DoD data? 3, 2, 1. You can use either one. Again, it's going to cost a little bit of money either way because you have to implement it, you have to add it to all your systems. But also, if you implement it and you don't put it within everybody, right? If everyone's not being under the same group, and some people decide to go for Duo, and some people go to Google Authenticator, and some people go to Okta, whatever other ones you want to name, those are just a couple of them. You aren't the administrator for that. If they can't get into their system, now you're in trouble because you're going to have some work stoppage on top of it all. So not only do you have a little bit of shadow IT going on, which is a big no-no in CMMC, you should know what everything is that's being used. But on top of that, now you can't help them if something goes wrong. And if you can, it's a whole long process that it would have been easier if you had been able to do option A. And again, all this needs to be kept in mind with, you have so much budget, right? How do you balance your budget with the employees and making sure that we don't get grumpy employees who want to now go whistleblow on you? And then how do we also, not get our risk too high and bring in some of the investigators anyway, just because we're causing problems. Speaking of Windows Hello earlier, now you need to enforce some MFA for your local access. And I have had conversations with people who have said, this does not apply to me because everything is in this enclave and we use MFA before you can get into the enclave. No, that is not what that means. Pretty sure that even if you can get into your system, say you got your badge, you get into the building, there are still areas that are closed off to you if you are like, a janitor versus a sysadmin who needs to work in the server. There will probably still need to be stuff with local access that requires additional MFA. I've had this conversation almost every time I get into a meeting where we actually have to discuss MFA and our access controls. They're like, well, we don't have to worry about that. It's all going to be here in this enclave right here in this cute little box, and there's an MFA, and you can't get into that box without it. Okay, great. How are you going to decide who has what pieces of the box? Well, we'll only put it into these sections. Okay, so how are you going to make sure that they only access those sections? We'll write a policy. Okay, you can write a policy, but you're now going to have to accept a lot more risk. Okay? And Windows Hello is not MFA on its own. So you can't just sign into your computer, with your beautiful faces, whether you're smiling or you're crying because you're running out of money for your project here. You got to have at least 2+. And, is it something you know, something you are, something you have? We've all heard those before. All right. We've got, 20 minutes? 13. Cool. All right. Talking cryptographics. So cryptography, I talked a little bit about this earlier. You can go the whole 9 yards and get the FIPS stuff that you need. That is just FYI, FIPS is the only encryption standard government actually recognizes and allows. You do not have the FIPS and you have something, anything, no matter how great it is below that, your scoring system looks like this. You get a 5 out of 5 when you got FIPS on there. Great, it's all implemented. I've used FIPS, government says great. You don't use FIPS, but you did use encryption. Okay, we're subtracting 3 from that. You don't actually even get points. You just get 3 subtracted from your score instead of 5 subtracted if you just don't have encryption. So that's how you get those negative numbers. You don't just get a partial score, you lose that many points instead. And you're like, how does that even work? I don't know, that's just how they decided. Okay, so you either chose FIPS validated, or you're like, well, it's encrypted anyway. It's gotta be FIPS. Cannot be anything else if you want that 110 out of 110 score so you can keep your $40 million contract or more, who knows. Okay, so we're gonna go into operations visibility. So this is where we actually say, who's doing this? Where did they do it from? How did this happen? What is going on? Why did I press the wrong button? I don't know. Okay, so you can get a SOC. You could even do SOC as a service. I know there's services out there that do that. You can get a SIM so that all of your stuff is at least getting centralized to some degree. I'm not going to go into detail about any of those things. If you don't know what those are, you can either go ask ChatGPT or we can chat after the session. Or we go back to, well, MFA will save us. We've got Duo, we've got Okta, and it's all in this enclave. And let's see what happens. Okay, we can do that. you've got those logs. I mean, they're not centralized, right? So that's the key bit there, right? You got your box, but you can't easily find where everything's going. That's not great for a maturity model. The whole point of this maturity model is to be able to come in and you can be like, oh yeah, if something happens, I'm going to know within 5 minutes that Gerald from HR decided to try to reach out and get into all of the billing information on Saturday at 9 a.m. Why was he doing that? I don't know. But now I know that that's happening. Instead of saying, well, I have logs over here. I've got some of my logs over there. I think I actually printed some out and put them in the file cabinet back there. Not really sure what I'm going to do with those. You need to be able to show a level of maturity. That's like the whole point of this thing, is to be able to show that you've met a certain level of maturity. And this is them trying to put a measurement to that, some metrics. Application whitelisting. You kind of mentioned this. You were asking about this. Did you have another question you wanted to ask?
Yeah. Are your prices based off of what the actual category given in the industry, or we just use open source?
I will say that it ranges widely. I honestly, truthfully, these numbers could be very accurate, and these numbers could also be very wrong. It really just depends on what are you trying to get out, right? Like different services, you might pay a lot of money, but you're also probably getting a lot more support on the back end. If you're doing something open source, you're not paying for it, but also how much support are you going to be able to get then and there, right? But there's a little bit of a balance to that. So kind of keep that in mind as you're considering that. So application whitelisting, we talked about this before. This same thing goes before where we talked about with like emails. You can't just email anybody, right? You have to tell them when you're setting up this environment, if you decide to go with the box, right? We're saying that right back from the beginning that we have only 15 people out of the 200. We have to find out, what do they actually use every day? Do they use email? Okay, we're going to need something like Outlook. And ideally, that's going to meet a certain standard, right? Because we have to meet the FedRAMP moderate level of security, which means you're going to have to go get your GCC high environment. And those things are not cheap. That's why those prices might look really high. It's because a lot of this comes down to you have to pay for that higher security. It's not offered right off the bat. So notice a lot of the time that just because you're paying a lot of money also does not necessarily mean that the risk is zero. You notice that there was some that were still low. There will always be some risk, right? I mean, you ideally would have something in place, but we've talked about in previous sessions, your security only goes so far, your controls only go so far, but at the end of the day, the people still have to follow that and not try to work around it. So if your employee sneaks their cell phone in and starts taking pictures of the screen, that kind of destroys the whole reason why you have certain controls in place, right? So when I'm saying things are zero, I'm saying in an ideal environment where everything else that we've talked about has been put into place, right? If you have an unlimited budget and very awesome to work with employees that are super gung-ho about security and won't try to get around you, you might have zero risk, or at least pretty darn close to it. All right, we're almost done. 7? Okay. We'll kind of speed through just a little bit more because I want to give you guys a chance to chat and ask questions. So, I've seen interesting things about what people think about having a privacy screen on their computers when they have to travel. Even in my own company, that's kind of you have to have that if you want to take your computer and go work around with it. If you are working with government data, consider the idea of someone just being right behind you. Kind of destroys the whole point of just having that privacy screen, right? Because the whole idea is that, from the sides, it looks black or whatever it is, right? Doesn't matter if they're standing right behind you. If you're on a plane, data, someone's going to see it, okay? That's not to say you couldn't do stuff like that. You just have to keep in mind that your environment needs to be conducive to not looking at that type of data. So you could work on those kinds of projects as long as you don't pull that data up, right? Because even with that privacy screen hack, or even with the physical enclave, it still has a risk. People can still walk by, and if your windows, say that it's like a windows into this office space, are transparent, they can look inside, there's a chance they could see data they're not supposed to see, right? That is a sign that would be considered data leakage. In fact, I think we actually talk about that later. But another one, this was one of my favorites. Someone just needs to come in and fix the AC. It's hot. You got servers. Those things cook up a storm. How do you take care of that? How do you make sure that they don't access information they're not supposed to? Well, it's just Dave. Dave's been here all the time. He comes in, we're always having issues. So he comes in like once a month or once a quarter. Okay. Yeah, we know Dave. Yeah, just let him go fix this thing. It won't take very long. Alternatively, you have to send an employee with him. And that employee now misses out on however much work they needed to get done, right? So you let him pass, and you're not spending any money. However, again, you aren't really paying attention to where he's going. And in some instances, depending on the level that you're at or the type of data you're working with, that is not allowed. There are actually types of CUI data, CUI specified, as opposed to CUI basic, which is just general CUI, where they might actually tell you, you cannot do that. It is too sensitive. And again, maybe having that escort isn't such a bad thing, but they will also lose out on a lot of work. So I need you guys to remember, is it worth the risk? Do I have the budget for this? Can I afford to do this? Do I even want to even be in this industry more anyway? I don't know. All right, we'll skip to the last one, defending the keep. Actually, I wanted to do this one. So critical 0 day. Let's say log4j happens. Everyone's panicking. It's on everybody's systems, or at least pretty darn close to a lot of people's systems. What do we do about this? Well, we're just going to stop everything. Everything is just offline until we fix this. How many organizations can actually do that and not lose a lot of money in the process? Pretty much none, as far as I'm aware, can just halt all operations for a day to patch that up. Not to mention, not everybody has people that are skilled enough to do it in a 24-hour period so you can be back up after that, right? So instead, we're like, oh, we'll just wait till the end of the quarter. We'll wait till the end of the day. Obviously, the longer you wait, the worse off you're going to be. And your risk is going to be that much higher. So this number could fluctuate, And this number from option A really depends on how much money would you actually lose in that 24-hour period. If you're a big SaaS company, you're probably making, hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. You don't have that kind of time. You don't have 24 hours to spend. Not to mention, you have SLAs to meet. You promised you would not be offline like that. But also, you have to accept that risk if you're willing to do that. So, how'd you guys do? How much money are you in debt now? How many times did you fail? I purposely may or may not have given you no money. But also, you kind of got an idea for how it feels to be doing this as maybe a local machining company who has no money to spend on that. And I just want you guys to remember a couple things here. So remember, your scope is your king. That is the end all be all. Make that tiny. If you can afford to make it tiny, make it tiny. If your whole business model is just DoD contracts and that's all you do every day, then maybe you should start considering how you're going to shell out enough funds to make that work for the whole environment. Because at that point, that is the realistic thing to do. Trying to make it work around everybody instead is actually going to cause you more friction, more problems than just putting everyone into that environment. But again, you have to plan for that. And the other thing is, do not cut corners. Don't just make them sign off on something and say, yeah, we totally took care of that. Where's the paper trail? So I just want to leave with you guys So you guys can ask questions after this with me. Keep in mind that CMMC, as terrifying as it is, right? We went through a lot, and that's just, some of the stuff that you see every day. That's not discussing any of those weird side channels we could take. This does not have to be that bad. There are ways to break it down, and if you're willing to think about like the project management triangle where it talks about like scope, money, speed, all that kind of stuff, there are ways to make it so it's more feasible. This was not designed to cut everyone out of doing this type of work. It's just a way to reconsider how we want to do security moving forward.
Thanks, Jade.
Yeah.
My pockets are a lot lighter than what they started.